Awesome.
Hey everyone, welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. We've got a very special guest today. He is a Grammy-nominated creative based in New York City with a diverse range of clients, including Nike, Adidas, Puma, the Rolling Stones, Katy Perry, Vampire Weekend, Arcade Fire, Esquire UK, BBC, Coca-Cola, British Airways, Pepsi, The Guardian, The New York Times, Time, and many others. Please join me in welcoming Alex Trochut. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Thomas. Very happy to be here.
You ready for 20 questions?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, question 1. Tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
Well, I think basically how I define myself is basically a creative, but I'm kind of like a digital creator. Mostly I think if there's no electricity, I'm sort of useless. I use paper and pen sometimes, but I need to sort of organize my ideas with the computer mainly, and the outputs normally are typography, but not only. So my specialty is not really typography. It would be, I would say, I work with the written medium. That means that I work mainly in lettering, meaning that normally I just work with the custom amount of letters that I need. If I need to write a logo, I would just work with those letters, and that kind of is different from calligraphy, typography, and lettering. Like calligraphy is writing letters, as you know, as a continuous flow, like one shot, one take, and it's heavily based on your manual skills, which I don't have. I understand how it's made, but I haven't practiced ever that much. And then you have typography, which is for kind of organizing a system and designing every character. As it's way more kind of technical. It's was like engineering shapes in order to make them all create a system that it needs to be working. Every character needs to work with all the other characters, and then lettering is basically, it's kind of like a custom job. Something like you would say typography would be something sort of like a net-a-porter, where everybody can buy and combine it in however clothing styles, and what I do is more kind of okay, this is designed for one client, and it's basically, it's like a tailored suit that it's measured just for that client, for that brand.
That's great. I was listening to some of your previous interviews and was really fascinated with your, I guess, lettering or typography work in 3D, in a kind of the spatial typography. Yeah, okay, so number 2, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm kind of like a believer that a lot of what we know is based on the desires that we have to absorb those things in a certain way, and those desires are sort of breathing in you, and we don't choose them. They're kind of there, and in a certain way I believe that beyond beyond hardware, we also inherited that software that we are kind of discovering through life. So I think it's hard for me to observe and understand clearly how I do things sometimes, or how the knowledge sort of it's articulated, because it's not really a knowledge to me. It's more kind of most of the time I try to get lost, and it's in there's moments of sort of when I'm a little bit, I have no idea how I got there, creatively speaking, and there in that place of I would be kind of clueless about telling you how I got here, but once I'm there is where you sort of find things that are creatively exciting. So I don't know, I guess yeah, that's what I think it's kind of very interesting about the subconsciousness, and how we are kind of programmed to do certain things. without knowing what these things, what is pulling these threads, so to speak, right? But yeah, like when it comes to creativity and yeah, knowledge it's kind of like a big word. For me, it's the power is more in the unknown and how you kind of like get excited about the things you want to understand or you don't know. And the unknown is very, very powerful. Like they say, like knowledge is power, but I think the unknown is sometimes way more powerful because it's a drive towards surprises and encountering maybe something that if you knew very well what's going to happen, it just becomes very boring. And I'm very bad about repeating something. I would probably be doing it better if I did it constantly, and it will keep improving. But at the same time, it will decline so much the motivation towards the process of it. So there's kind of like a sweet spot between having control over something and then enjoying the experience of discovering also while you're making it, if that makes sense.
It does. You've also got that kind of genetic knowledge as well, right?
Yeah, I guess we can say that because yeah, my grandfather, he was a son of a printer. So my great grandfather was a French printer in the army, and he was sort of like printing all sorts of fake news that were saying that the war, the First World War, was going great for France, and well, he was seeing a lot of death. So he decided to quit, and like it was an act of bravery to me because apparently when you quit the First World War, if they got you, it's automatically, it was a death sentence. But he decided to do that because his brother died and he didn't see much of a point on that war. So he migrated to Spain without knowing Spanish, having money or much, but he knew how to print. So that the technology in Spain wasn't as developed as in France. So he was a tough man, my great grandfather. He arrived to Spain and he sort of like had to figure it out everything. But he built a company in Barcelona that become one of the most successful in town. And around 1920 is when he had his son, my grandfather. And I imagine this kid, my grandfather, just being surrounded by all these letterpress machines and being in a company that I would say that my great grandfather was not necessarily a crazy creative person, but I think he was like a good heart man, like you know how to deal with a business and have that more kind of like cold heart that would like drive the business forward very efficiently. But then his son was like this sort of like very creative person that by the time that he was 20, he released this incredible modular system called Super Veloz, which basically it was just one set of typography that you would buy. Imagine it would be like kind of like nowadays we buy fonts digitally, but yeah, back in the days you buy a set of letterpress that was basically every size had to be a different set of lead pieces. What he created is just one single set that was just like one size. It was universal, but it was 250 pieces. It was like this massive puzzle that you could arrange in different ways. So you would be able to construct letters for headlines, logos, alphabets, and also illustration. And the possibilities were kind of like limitless. Like it was kind of like an infinite sort of like Lego sort of like typographical puzzle. And yeah, that was my grandfather. But yeah, long story short, basically my grandfather, when he was 20, he kind of like just, I imagine him like enjoying so much the design part of his business. But being a designer back in the days, meant that you were also a printer, and he had to inherit this sort of like take charge of this company that had like 150 workers, and he probably was not doing a lot of design at some point because he just had to be a businessman. So yeah, he didn't become a great businessman. And also there was this, like, I'm moving forward now towards like at the end of his life, where towards the 60s, offset printing was this new technology that came in, and basically he had to establish a new change for the company, but he couldn't adapt to that change of technology. So basically, the end of his life was a little bit bitter. But I'm explaining all this because this is where the genetics come in, because his son, my father, witnessed all this sort of decline and what made our family bankrupt, basically, because my grandfather had to sell most of what his father had gotten in the company, and my father had to start from scratch, and my grandfather died just like 6 months before I was born. So by the time all these, many years happened, and like I'm 12, and I told my dad that I wanted to do graphic design, not because I knew much about my grandfather, but because I wanted to just, follow what I was seeing, that I thought it was cool. It was skateboard graphics and album covers and video games and all that stuff. It's like, how do you do this? Oh, these are graphic designers. My uncle told me, and I was like, oh, I want to do that. And my dad was like, well, you probably, you're just a kid. But then I was really serious about it. And by the time I was like 16, 17, my dad, I think, was really struggling with this, because he really tried to discourage me from that idea. It's like, no, you're nuts. Like, this is the worst idea. Like, that basically ruined my dad, like physically it was very hard for him. And I think this is a terrible decision. But then I think that was also good for me, because I sort of like pushed myself to prove that I really wanted to do that. And I had to prove it to my family and also to myself. And he gave me the chance. My dad was like, okay, I can do it. But then he really saw that I was really passionate and that I really enjoyed it. And then it was more when I was in school that my teachers were telling me like, oh, but are you related to Joan Trochut? And I was saying, yeah, that was my grandfather. And and the teachers were like, okay, kid, like no pressure, but yeah, you have your grandfather was kind of like a very important figure for Spanish design. And so yeah, I thought it was kind of like a lot of pressure at the time, in a way that I didn't enjoy it, to be recognized as, the young sort of like relative to a person that had such a praise. But then, like I think I was just attracted to letters the same way as he did. And I think it's pretty fascinating because, yeah, like, I don't know, you sort of maybe inherit a physical trait, like you maybe have, you're built in a certain way so you can run faster, or you could do certain things because you're physically prepared that way. And that side of the genes I really get. But then to something so specific as letters, that the genetics could travel even to have, devotion for something so artificial as letters, it's kind of fascinating to me. Yeah. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
No, I love it. I love it. Thank you. Number 3, you kind of answered this, but the question is, why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
Yeah, again, I think it's maybe one of those mysteries that I think we kind of like, our job is to figure it out what we're supposed to do. But we don't really know. We know we love things, but we don't know why. But yeah, that's I guess the answer. That one will be shorter.
Great. 4 is, what does your future look like?
To be honest, I've never been so clueless. I feel like right now, and I don't know also how you feel like personally. There's one question, but then the idea of future itself is it's another one, right? Like we have like, I think it's related too, because of course there's so many things that are gonna be affecting us that we didn't foresee or anticipate, of course, a couple of decades ago or just one few years ago, when it comes to climate change and of course all the instability in the world. But when it comes to the technological challenges, this is kind of like the third one of the threats that I feel like they're kind of like polluting my my clouding my side of the future in a certain ways, because yeah, like I feel like design itself, it's something that for me it's very much based on craft. And these days, for example, I feel like I'm a bit overwhelmed by how fast technology moves. So I think for me it's kind of like a moment of accepting that it's it's a war that I will never win, having control of the tools. So the tools are always changing so much that you can try to move with it, but at some point it will be very hard to maintain the control that you had maybe at some point, especially when the tools are getting more and more complex every day, right? Because before I had like kind of like the feeling that the tools were simpler, so I could go very deep on them, similar to how maybe back in the day an artist could be very good with brushes and a canvas. The technology itself wasn't complicated. What made it unique was the hand and how you control that very basic tool, and how you manage to personalize something. These days I feel like the challenge is how you combine those skills that are maybe more talent that you might develop or you're born with, but then there's all these other technical side that is fascinating, because the machines are allowing us to have this incredible amount of possibilities, but at the same time it's so hard to absorb them all the time. So there's a kind of like there's an anxiety attached to this excitement, for me. And yeah, it's kind of like I don't know what's going to happen in the next years, especially with the AI coming in so hard, so fast. Um, because I don't know if it's going to become like an intersection in creativity where there's going to be creatives that are going to be fully invested in an AI way of working, and then there's going to be the other sort of creatives that are going to be kind of like working on more the traditional way of doing things, and some things will be better in one way and some things will be better in another way, I guess. Or this is what I hope the most, is like everything will integrate into kind of like still giving creatives the control that will allow them to create styles. Because with AI, what I feel, it's very hard to form a style when the machine does 99% of the things for you. You just have an idea. But to me, like creativity, it's a mix of craft and thinking. And if I had to choose, I would choose craft, because I feel like thinking or conceptualizing is kind of like a consequence of the process of creation, but of just discovering something as you make. But when it comes to AI, is almost like climaxing before taking any clothes off. So it's kind of like a very weird way of like, I don't find it fun or exciting that much, if I'm honest. But it's the future. So yeah, I'm trying to be more open about it. But there's a certain part of me that it's a little bit kind of like, yeah, I guess insecure about it. But I hope that, yeah, it will, yeah, it will integrate in a way that will give us control, not just kind of like give a shortcut. It's just how I feel like it's a shortcut that sometimes is the long path has always been better for me, like to do same with food. No, if you cook things fast, yeah, you can eat them and it's convenient, but I prefer the slow cook. So yeah, I don't know. Future is I never thought future was going to be so uncertain.
It's an interesting question, right? Because design in the future is something that I guess a lot of us are thinking about, but typography or lettering in the future is a little bit different. And especially if like typography can be transferred through genetics, then what does that mean for a future generation who has the genes of typography? What will they be creating, I guess? Number 5, yeah.
No, yeah, you're right. I think the good thing about typography is like because it's a human invention, it's always kind of like adapting to its time in different ways, and we're always modifying text and going back and forth. But yeah, I wonder if the future at some point will invent some sort of like telepathy, so we don't need to read things anymore. So then I guess typography will be finally obsolete. But for now, I think, and also I gotta say that so far what I've seen with AI, it hasn't been very impressive for me in the AI area, or typography area, sorry. But I'm sure it could be done. And the moment it's done, I think it could be incredible and horrifying too, because then yeah, like many people lose their jobs. But maybe it will be so incredible to have a different typeface for everything, because you could actually do it. But yeah, we're very, very far away from that, thankfully, I think.
Great. So you're in New York, but you studied at Elisava in Barcelona. So number 5 is let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
Yeah, I think location it can do so much for you. In one hand, I think like it's a lot based on with what company are you surrounded with. That could really, I think, for me, when I came to New York, I had some of the most lovely years sharing studio with some of the creatives I met here. Laura Alejo, Isaac Bertrand, Freddy Arenas. I love those years with them. There was such a nice energy of that studio where everybody was really kind of like having that very genuine interest and willing to help each other. Yeah, and that was like very defining for me, that sort of energy. But then it's true that sometimes location could give you that excitement that you lose when you're into that routine, that it's always sort of like Groundhog Day can really happen very fast as years go by. And creativity kind of like, that's an enemy for creativity. So after the pandemic, and during the pandemic too, I was traveling more because remote work was sort of like more accepted, and that sort of like discovered me that yeah, the best conditions for good work are far from Monday to Friday in an office or a studio. So I I really think that there's a certain thing that energy that happens when you're in a different place, and that can give you, I don't know, you become a little bit more efficient with your way of working. I don't know how it is, if it's because you are in an interesting place and you are allowing yourself to be outside more, and you get maybe inspiration from other things, and you also want to be more efficient with your time. You're not going to be hopefully glued to your social media or Twitter uh, while you're sitting on a beautiful place. So you're probably just gonna reduce a lot the procrastination. So there's maybe those elements too, but yeah, I find it like very, very healthy to to just go away, and it doesn't matter the amount of work you can have, because I also felt like it was harder for me to be stressed in a new environment. Like my level of frustration was growing higher if I'm in the same space. I see that there's more intensity of work happening, and sometimes that could be like a negative sort of like energy coming in you. But then if you are somewhere else and you're meeting new situations and people, you put that kind of like on bay, and it's kind of like you compartmentalize better that feeling, and you kind of like just focus on what needs to be done. So yeah, I'm a huge advocate of like traveling more for creative work.
Hmm.
uh, yeah, what do
Great.
you think about that? Do you travel a lot too, right?
I do, yeah. Yeah, just picking up travel again in 2023. I'm scared and excited at the same time. I think kind of a lot of us are probably feeling that way.
Nice. Where are you planning to go?
So I'm not sure about Krakow, but I'm invited there. And then it looks like I'll be in Paris, and in March I'll be in Lisbon. So
Oh, nice.
yeah,
Yeah, everybody's going to Portugal these days. Seems like the
yeah,
new the new paradise. Yeah,
yeah.
that's great.
Number six is, if you had to start from the beginning, what advice would you give your former younger self?
um I guess I'll if I could talk to myself, I would try to uh tell him to be less afraid to share, and to kind of like be less precious about maybe your own creations. I feel like where I come from in Barcelona, um, yeah, like also the design community, um, it's a different community, at least for me, how it was when I was growing up, versus the community of today, especially with 3D community. And I think the difference sometimes is maybe because the design community, the value was more maybe having possessing some assets back in the day. Like if somebody had like, a very special font that they never wanted to share because that was sort of like exclusive to certain people, but it was all circulated, funny and love. Like those fonts were not something that they designed or that we paid for, but there was a little bit of a status related to who had those assets, and then of course your ideas, right? But um, people, I think there was a little bit of a, and I was part of the same culture in terms of like you wanted to protect a lot your knowledge in a certain way, because that could, you maybe felt like it could be taken away if you shared it. And um and I think today what is kind of like refreshing for me is to see how much of sharing there is in the community, especially with 3D. I think that also happens because 3D itself, like if you wouldn't have the sharing aspect of it, so if there wasn't tutorials in YouTube or people giving their time and giving it to the community, individually speaking, will be so hard to progress. It will be very slow. So yeah, I think that for me, it's been kind of like very clear in the last years. And I'm way less scared to kind of like give things that maybe are, I protected them as something like I wanted to avoid me maybe being copied or like uh, things like that. And yeah, and also things take time. I would say to my younger self that you'll get where you're supposed to be with time, like just don't fight it, or try to make too many strategies. Things happen when they're supposed to happen in the end, if they're supposed to happen. So yeah, that's easier said than done, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Often on the podcast, we talk about the collaborative nature of design these days versus like when I went to school, it was, really protecting your own work and being the one who knew, and how
Mhm.
that's changed. Number seven, what's a day in your life like?
So yeah, day in my life normally starts with some exercise. um, I like to do either like some functional training, uh, at with some classes at the gym, or some yoga. I started to do yoga because I'm realizing that my back starts to hurt and I haven't ever stretched. So that's that's about time when I'm 41. So I'm finally doing it, and my body's thanking me for that. So I do that in the mornings, and then basically I work from 10 till 6 normally, or something like that. and my energy doesn't allow me to go. It can work longer, but it doesn't get better. And yeah, it's kind of like, it's at this point, it's kind of like there's an amount of energy I can give to work, and that's pretty much it. And I have my routine, and I don't like to take lunch breaks. I eat in front of the computer, so it's kind of like I try to facilitate as much as I can that focus on a solid sort of like amount of hours. Of course, you get interrupted all the time, but if I put like a Spanish lunch in between, that would be even worse for me. So I don't do that. And then yeah, just come home, and maybe I meet with some friends, or we're starting to cook with my partner, which is also been a new addition to my routine, or play some music. I got into modular synthesizers with the pandemic. It was kind of like it was the second epidemic behavior that we had, a good one in that case, which is just start playing with friends with these machines, and it's fascinating to learn without knowing much about music, because you basically program these machines to create the music for you. So you don't play an instrument, but you sort of like set up the rules. So this thing kind of like does it for you. And yeah, those are kind of like the things I might do during a day. And yeah, and then in the weekend, try to not work, go to an exhibition, stay with friends, drink some wine. That's it.
Great. Number 8 is lifelong learning is a popular topic these days. How do you stay up to date?
Right. I don't know if like there's so much of lifelong learnings anymore. I feel like there's lifelong questionings because I I don't feel like we are in a solid ground anymore to kind of like find a truth that could be existing through life. I find like things are constantly recalibrating and being redefined. So I think it's very hard to. I think about my parents, for example, and certain things, and how also they are adjusting to so many changes. And so yeah, it's hard for me to, yeah, like I'm also like, I'm kind of like against anything that is solid in terms of like values. I think everything is related to relative to something else, and there's a lot to be said. But yeah, I'm trying to stay as open as possible, I guess. Yeah. That was kind of like a vague answer, but yeah, it comes with a good heart. Yeah.
So a unique answer. Just about halfway here. Number 9, what tools do you use? Are you a digital nomad?
Yeah, my tools are pretty much digital, and I work a lot with. I used to work from since I started with basically vector and pixel, like Photoshop and Illustrator or freehand. And then around 2015, I started to work more with Cinema 4D, and then that is sort of like ramificated into like dozens of different softwares that are kind of like connected to the 3D backbone of everything. And yeah, I'm trying to do as much as I can traveling, like spend like 6 months here in Brooklyn, and the rest it's sort of open. And yeah, that's a little bit the lifestyle that I'm trying to maintain for now. But yeah, when I travel, the setup changes. Last time I traveled to Southeast Asia, I traveled with the workstation, and I put it in one of those Pelican bags, and I travel to Thailand and Australia with that, and then back to Spain. And yeah, that kind of like solves quite few things for me to be able to work with the machine that I usually work in the studio. But now the technology is really changing again for the better, and you can get some pretty good remote access to your computer that almost has no lag at all. So I think next time maybe I try not to travel with the big computer, which wasn't great.
Number 10 is, how do you deal with work-life balance?
Yeah, like I'm pretty much a workaholic, I would say. And also because I don't have kids, and my partner is also a workaholic too. I think we are both sort of like quite accepting of the quantity. Maybe it's not so much our goal for certain things. If we have work, we have that priority, and it's kind of like it's what also makes me happy. Like when I'm traveling, or like I'm in a holiday mode sort of thing. So many times it's just like I like to just keep working on something that maybe it's personal. It's kind of like the time that I would reserve something. It's like the dessert. Like, okay, now it's just like, oh, now enjoy this while you are maybe on holiday, and I can enjoy that process a lot. And I think that completes a lot my happiness. Like when my ideal free time is kind of like working a little bit, enjoying company of friends, and at the end of the day, but yeah, having that sense of productivity is kind of like part of my, yeah, I guess my desires or addictions. But yeah, it's so established that I cannot really take it away.
Great. Number 11, if you weren't doing what you do now, what would you be doing?
I would probably just be doing personal art projects. If I didn't have to work, if I had uh, all the money, but then I would kind of like try to find a way to give time in a way that could have a positive impact towards something. So I think it will be a combination of personal fulfillment, and then kind of like giving some sort of like service that with my individual capacity could be helpful. So I will have to figure that out. But yeah, I haven't thought about it because it's very far from from my reality. But I think that would be the dream. Yeah.
12 is, what would you not like to do in terms of career?
Well, yeah, I guess anything. I was a very bad student when I was a kid, and I think that's why also my dad probably was like, oh, like now you're gonna be a starving artist. It's gonna be horrible. And and he really wanted me to work for his company, and my dad just, out of he had to, he when he was 22, he was like, I need to make some money, and he started a security company. But that was not something that he did out of any sort of like will or appetite for that. There was not appeal for him to that. It was just like, okay, this business is an obligation, and and that was what was presented to me. It's like, you're gonna be working in this company. And wow, I was really, really horrified by that idea. Maybe that why I apply myself so hard in design. So yeah, I think I think that would make me very, very unhappy if I had to look at work as obligation. And of course, it's never 100% one thing or the other. Like, and in that sense, I feel like it's such a love and hate relationship with our work, because we're doing that all the time. It's not, because you do what you want. It's like, oh, you're enjoying yourself all the time. That's not how it is. You lose, actually, when you have, I guess, a 9 to 5 work. You could maybe have something that you fully understand as pleasure, and when it becomes work, it's not pleasure 100% anymore, right? But yeah, I think answering your question, yeah, I would hate to be working on a bank or something like that. For me, would be, yeah, pretty devastating.
13, what's your favorite word, quote, or sentence?
I love this sentence from Bruce Lee, and not because I like martial arts or anything like that, but he said, "Don't think, feel," and that itself is just like a little detail that puts together so many things for me, because I'm, like I was saying, like I'm not really a thinker. I'm more like a crafter, and the magic stuff doesn't happen thinking. It's something that appears while you are in that drift, and you let the voice that you don't control take control, like, and those things are what, like, really I feel like it's such a, it's a flow, it's a state of that, I guess we can call it inspiration, and it comes when your mind, it's in a certain way, but yeah, Don't Think, Feel by Bruce Lee, I think that's really good. I have another one actually too, that it's the definition of creativity by Carl Jung. I don't know if like the definition of creativity, but like the quote says, like, the creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, by the play instinct, acting from inner necessity. The creative mind plays with the objects it loves. And that to me is also, like, explains a lot what creativity is. It's just this game, and you don't control it. It's just like it's meant to be play and fun, and it's nothing rational or intellectual, and yeah, I think it's also very, very interesting, not to see that when the desires that you have are speaking out loud, you're just witnessing them. You're just witnessing your deep mind making decisions from the consciousness, and you might think you're responsible for, but what you are many times, you're just watching yourself do something that you're not really sure why you do it.
Do you have a least favorite word quote or sentence?
Yeah, I think I'm not a big fan of the less is more thing. Because I mean, let's be clear, like, which by the way is probably, like, so many times is true, like less is more many times. I don't disagree with that. And I apply that to myself many times too. But sometimes I think what it really, like, I hate about that sentence is when I think it's used as a motto when it's actually in fact, like, some sort of like the result of lack of technical skills, and then it's like, oh, less is more, and it's like, yeah, but like, you're maybe not exploring more options sometimes, that I feel like, I think it needs to be something at some point in the process, kind of like subtractive, I guess, like there's a moment to take out, but not because you couldn't put in, right? So, like, I think, yeah, it's a funny sentence, less is more for me, and I never liked it too much.
I like your description of that. Number 15 is, if you had to pick one word to describe yourself, what would you choose?
I think I'm sort of like a chameleon, like a person that kind of like, yeah, merges with whatever is surrounded by, and I think, yeah, like, I steal a lot from what is around me, and always filters it in its own way, but definitely like a sponge that takes certain things and makes them his own way. I believe, yeah, a lot about that. And like, I was reading Questlove's book, Creative Quest, and like he questions his own creativity, because he says that his way of creation is basically some sort of process of embodying other people's work, and he kind of like even sometimes like wears like the person that he's admiring in order to become that person, and then sort of like remixes all these personalities in his own way, and I think it's kind of like very true for many creatives, that's that's a lot what we do, no? That we just like, we're constantly remixing.
Final stretch number 16. What keeps you up at night?
I don't know, but I don't sleep as well as I used to. And yeah, but yeah, I wouldn't say like there's things that I have reasons to keep me up at night, but yeah, I'm not sleeping as well. That's for sure. I should maybe, if you have some advice, I would take it.
Yeah, I have my own trouble sleeping. Number 17. What's a dream you're chasing?
I would love to do big sculptures, typographical sculptures. And I would love to, I've been working a lot with the idea of paradoxes in finding a way to create these 3D ambigrams where you could look and you can see one word in one angle and then becomes another word from another angle. And I'm trying to find the right tone for these sculptures to make them the less cliche possible and more poetic. So I'm kind of like dealing a little bit with what it's been done and how maybe I could add maybe something that would spark not so much the obvious, but create this sort of like debate in a conversation. If that was a sculpture, I hope that it will make people discuss ideas and see it like in so many different ways, about topics that could be relatable, but at the same time not conclusive, because that I feel like it's when we do design all the time, we are trying to be communicating towards the collective acceptance to the maximum efficiency. Like everybody needs to get the same message, hopefully, right? And this should be the opposite. I hope that this would be something that people would internalize in a way that would be very different from one to the other, and create this sort of like strong connection, but very divisive. So I hope I can do something like that one day, but we'll see.
What inspires you?
Mostly art and nature, I think, and some forms of fashion too. And I think it's hard for me to judge because I don't know anything about fashion really, but sometimes there's a very interesting intersection of culture and art that happens there, and I think is like I was yesterday actually at the Virgin Abloh exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum, and that was very clear to me how he was recycling his own memories and his childhood and his upbringing in a very artistic way, but for these brands in a way that was so surprising and fresh. And it was a great format for art too, because it was fashion, but at the same time, yeah, I could see how that had this very very strong intersection between these two currents of culture and art.
Last couple here. Any advice you'd like to share?
Well, I would say like don't let automatization to dominate your decisions. I think software, social media, and all that stuff could be very it could trap you very fast. And try to stay in contact with your own compass. It's easy to fall into these invisible currents of technology and just be kind of lost in it. I feel like that many times, and it's I think it's important that we kind of like force ourselves to be against the trend of changing our neuroplasticity. This technology is sort of like making us all very dispersed and focused. And it's definitely, we need to, it's another kind of exercise. It's not physical. You need to do this other sort of like mental exercise to step out of this sort of like modification of the brain that we are feeding constantly. So yeah, I would think like it's an advice that I should give to myself basically, because I'm a victim of it, and I think what everybody says is meditation seems to be the best way to combat that. And I did it for a while actually to do some meditation, but yeah, I think it needs to be something like more present in everybody's life, sort of, I think.
Good. And for 20, so there are a lot of interviews out there with you. There are people copying your work, but let's hear from you. How do you want our listeners to follow you? How do you want us to see your work or respond to it?
Basically, I think Instagram is what I don't post too much on Instagram, but this is probably where I'm more active. And yeah, I'm always like happy to be in contact with someone. If somebody writes me an email, I'm always trying to like at least give an answer. And yeah, so feel free to send me an email. That's always better than the DMs. Yeah, Twitter too, by the way. Yeah, Twitter. I'm trying to be better at Twitter. Yeah, but my Twitter handle is Alex Trochut, and Instagram is Trochut.
Okay, Alex, thank you so much for being on. Your generosity really shows through in your answers to these questions. I really appreciate the long answers, and I'm sure that our audience does too. Thank you so much for being a guest.
Oh, thank you so much, Thomas. It's been a pleasure, and thanks for having me.
Thanks.